All you had to do was pay us enough to fucking live.
Last week, a young, disgruntled, young 20-year-old man, fed up with his dogshit wages, decided to just let it all burn down. Literally. He burned down the entire warehouse he worked at. This is after a slew of many high-profile assassinations going on for well over a year now. The pressure in the room is reaching an absolute boiling point right now, and this could very well be the trigger for the inevitable Gen Z revolution we've all been talking about. In fact, based on what we're already seeing, it may have already begun, and that would mean we're about to witness history here. But this time, it's going to be a very different and very unique type of revolution, and it could actually be much more brutally effective. Make no mistake about it, we're probably not going to get an all-out millions of people taking up arms to storm the government type of revolution today. Unlike past major revolutions, the government has drones, snipers, flamethrowers, and all kinds of other weapons that you're just not going to win a battle against. This revolution is shaping up to look a lot more like guerrilla warfare. Isolated and targeted individual attacks, much like the ones we saw last week. It all started with you-know-who way back last year, and since this, his name has been synonymous with all kinds of words I can't really say on YouTube right now. But you all know what I mean. This is much harder, if not impossible, to stop compared to an all-out open revolution, and the cracks are already beginning to show. Part 1. Elite hubris. A society with millions of young people disaffected and disenfranchised is a very dangerous recipe that never ends well for anyone. History has shown this time and time again. Not that you even need a history lesson for this, it's just common sense at this point. Humans are resilient, tough, and hard to break. We've overcome unspeakable hardships and atrocities throughout our history. But there is a tipping point that you never want to push people over. I call this the point where they have nothing to lose anymore. Now, we've often compared modern-day wage slavery to Roman slavery here on this channel, and it often shocks a lot of people when they learn that a lot of Roman slaves, particularly in the cities, actually had far better economic conditions than we do today. They worked fewer hours than us, had more holidays, had benevolent slave masters who feasted with them, and were often freed before the age of 30. These are all historically verifiable facts. You can look them up for yourself. It's all true. But you might be understandably skeptical of this claim at first. The Romans were notorious for being brutal and merciless. Wars, crucifixions, brandings, they did it all. How and why would such a savage society actually treat some of their slaves so well? You probably don't buy the idea that they just magically became benevolent. You probably suspect a hidden motive here, and you'd be correct. The wealthy Roman elites understood a key lesson of human nature that modern-day elites today seem to have forgotten due to their sheer hubris. They knew not to push their slaves to the point where they had nothing to lose. When you look at all the benefits an urban Roman slave had, a 5-day holiday where their masters would actually serve them, manumission by the age of 30 in many cases, and a clear pathway into the upper middle class after being freed, these all served as what they called pressure release valves, inherent self-motivating and self-disciplining measures. Ruling with an iron fist and pure brutality is very, very costly, both financially and emotionally. In the early days of the empire, Rome would learn this the hard way, as countless slaves with nothing to lose would turn on their masters and unalive or even poison them. Not only that, but they had to deal with constant costly slave revolts and rebellions, most notably the Spartacus Rebellion, which you've probably heard of. It was at this point when the Roman elites, out of necessity and not benevolence, came up with an elegant solution. Instead of creating an angry slave population with nothing to lose, let's just give them something to lose instead. So they gave them holidays, a promise of freedom for good service, and a clear pathway into the upper middle class. Now, if that all sounds familiar, it's probably because it is. After all, that's what this modern society and our delusional boomer parents promised us if we worked hard and went to college. Problem is, we all seen and have experienced that that's all bullshit at this point. The elites have stolen everything from us. We have nothing to lose anymore, and we're starting to see the consequences of it. The promises of a good middle-class life, if you work hard, are nice and everything. The Roman elites used that trick too, and it worked perfectly fine for them. But the difference is they actually delivered on their promises, unlike the modern-day system. So now we're left with millions of disaffected young people with nothing to lose, and unlike previous generations, they're not buying your BS gaslighting that it's all their fault and they just need to work harder. They know the truth by now. They're young, hungry, and dangerous, and the only question remaining is what happens next. As you may have noticed, we're getting very close to 50,000 subscribers now. This has always been a huge milestone in our eyes, so if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us get closer to this big magic number. Thanks a bunch, you guys are the best. So I'm gonna do something a bit different for this part of the video. You guys know typically we like to analyze economics and history to get a better understanding of what the hell's going on, and I'm gonna tell you now that that's all bullshit. Everything you think you know about the world is wrong. Well, it isn't wrong per se, but it's about to be totally irrelevant, and here's why. If you're watching this video, chances are you're a young person in your 20s or 30s, and you've never experienced a war or violent revolution in your lifetime. I haven't either. But we haven't been alive all that long in the grand scheme of things, and the fact that we haven't experienced it yet in our very young lifetimes does not mean that we're special, or that we're living in such a special era where it just magically can't happen. Statistically speaking, it's not all that unlikely we'll experience one in general, but with how bad things are getting now, it's increasingly likely it'll happen sooner rather than later if nothing changes. And when, not if, when that happens. None of the universal rules about the economy that we've all taken for granted matters anymore. It'll all be totally irrelevant, and let me give you an example to show you what I mean. Let's say you're a young person who's rightfully concerned about AI taking away all the jobs, and so you're given the advice of, hey, just study something AI related like being an AI programmer. And if the system is stable and secure, then advice like that should theoretically work out. But if violent revolutions break out, if people start angrily burning down AI data centers all over the country and attacking AI CEOs, which is already happening right now as we speak, the AI programmer career you studied for now becomes totally obsolete and irrelevant. Not because the economics were bad, but because economics don't even matter when there's a violent revolution. Let's say you work a few extra hours of overtime to save enough money to buy yourself a nice dinner at your favorite restaurant. In a safe and stable society, you go to the restaurant after work, pay for dinner, and enjoy your delicious meal. In a violent revolution, however, you work hard, arrive at the restaurant, only to find it's been totally burned to the ground. And that's if you even make it to the restaurant safely to begin with. You get the idea by now. Every cause and effect assumption we make every single day is based on the assumption that we live in a safe and stable society. Once that goes away, we're playing a whole new ballgame that most of us are just not ready for. So, how does this tie into everything we've discussed so far? Well, in very specific ways, actually. Let's go back to the warehouse incident. I've heard countless corporate chills and pathetic defenders of the broken system come up with all kinds of moronic, inaccurate excuses for why companies shouldn't pay workers a living wage. We can't afford to raise the minimum wage. Businesses can't afford it. Now, I'm not going to give you all the logical economic reasons why that's just totally flat out wrong in this video, as I've done that in countless others already. Instead, I'm just going to really simplify things for you in the most brutally honest way possible. If you can't afford to pay your workers enough to live, you better figure out a way to do so, and fast, because otherwise this is going to happen more and more and more. The last warehouse fire cost over $500 million in damages. Now you can cry and bitch and moan all you want about how paying your workers slightly more is unprofitable for business, but I think even you have the common sense to know that paying your workers a few extra bucks per hour is going to be a lot more profitable, even a lot lot better for profit and business than losing $500 million in a fire in damages, even if all you care about is business and profits. It's even a much wiser business decision on your part at this point. Let me make it very clear that none of this is a threat. It's just a description about the inevitable nature of reality. It's not a moral argument. I'm not encouraging or condoning these violent acts by any means. I'm merely explaining the historical reality that they will continue to happen increasingly more if something doesn't change. You're going to have to pay up one way or another, and it can either be in the form of paying your workers more or in the form of paying $500 million of damages, as we all saw last week. Part 3, the solution. So, as much as we've talked about violent revolution so far, I think we can all reasonably agree that it'd be a last resort solution. Don't get me wrong, I love big explosions and fireworks and live action movie scenes as much as the next guy, but it's a lot easier to clamor for a revolution on the internet behind a keyboard with no consequences than to actually physically go out there and risk your life. If it comes down to it, then it comes down to it. But we should ideally explore all other avenues first. And for this particular issue, the answer is honestly quite simple. We simply have to reduce the inequality at this point.
Intelligent conversation about that, right? Because the lefties say, too much inequality. And they need to be listened to because the evidence is quite clear. If you let the inequality ramp up enough, the whole system destabilizes because the people at the bottom think, fuck it, we'll just flip the system upside down.
Right.
No one wants that. Like right-wing conservatives don't want that. So because you could make a Republican argument and say, don't let the inequality in your neighborhood get out of hand because the crime rate will skyrocket. And the empirical evidence on that is overwhelmingly strong. Inequality drives crime. Now you can argue about why, but the fact that it does that's not disputable.
Anytime you advocate for any sort of reduced inequality, you inevitably get bombarded with accusations of being a communist. So I played a clip there from a guy who I don't particularly like, but someone who's clearly not a communist. In fact, he's the one who primarily led the charge in terms of the modern day Red Scare discourse. The point here isn't to entirely eliminate inequality. You do need some level of it to encourage innovation and productivity in society. But as with anything in life, whether it's sunlight, chocolate, or cigarettes, there comes a point which too much of it becomes a bad thing. And even the most ardent anti-Marxists out there would agree with this, as you just saw. This leads me once again back to the Roman Empire. All roads really seem to lead back to Rome here. Now, anyone with even a slight bit of historical common sense knows very well that the Roman Empire was no communist egalitarian paradise. You had kings and emperors and elite senators living in luxurious villas, and the rest of the population living in cramped, dangerous insulae. Everywhere you looked, you saw constant reminders of your place in the hierarchy. Even at gladiator games, you had the rich elites in the front row, average citizens in the middle, and women and slaves at the back. It was extremely stratified, unequal, and hierarchical. Or was it? You see, inequality is a relative term, and not an absolute one. Roman society was absolutely incredibly unequal and hierarchical. That is, compared to every society that came before it and every society that came afterwards until now. We've heard a lot at this point about how the top 1% own just about everything in the world at this point, hoarding over 40 to 50% of the wealth, with a few select billionaires owning more than the entire bottom half of the population, or something like that. With how bad we've been told things were, historically speaking, you'd think that with the Roman elites, the top 1% inequality would be just as bad, if not far worse. So I decided to do some research into this, and what I found will absolutely blow your mind. The top 1% in Roman society only owned about 16% of the total wealth. And I use the word only in a very modernistic sense here. When I first read the statistic, my initial reaction was, wait, what? 16% was actually considered bad back then? And you're actually probably reacting the exact same way right now. A society that owned actual slaves, had actual kings, emperors, and dictators that reminded you of your status and your place in the hierarchy everywhere you looked. That society, literally looks like an egalitarian communist utopia compared to our modern society. Statistically speaking, our modern day wealth inequality is literally 2 to 3 times worse than the Roman Empire. And even in the Roman Empire, the elites had to pull out every trick in the book to keep the masses from rioting. Manumission for slaves, free food for all their citizens, free gladiator games, chariot races, and over 100 holidays and festivals per year. Bread and circuses, as they would call it. Problem is, in the modern day, we still have these circuses and clown shows from the elite, and we're not even given the bread to go along with it. It's no wonder the revolution is well underway at this point, and if we're not willing to solve these problems, it's only going to get much, much worse. The guy who burned down the warehouse challenged Luigi Mangione in his act of rage, and recently there's been a major legal update in the case of Luigi Mangione that could possibly allow him to walk away as a free man on the day of the court trial. We cover this more in depth in this video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.